Good morning. Thanks for clapping. 9 o'clock didn't do that, so I don't know what that means about you, Charles. Sorry. We are super glad that God has been using Charles here and gets to use he and Emily continually in this next phase of life. We've been growing as a church, and so we are part of a movement of churches that always asks this question. We say, where can the good news of Jesus be more clear? How can it be more accessible? And so we've just been glad to see that happening. And I say this every week, and we mean it. If you are a follower of Jesus and you are connecting with God and some others here, we're glad that you're coming and doing that on a Sunday morning. That happens elsewhere as well. But if you don't know Jesus, or if you're just investigating God, you don't know where you're at with him, or you know where you're at with him and you're just trying to figure that out, we're glad you're here too. It's an honor and a privilege that you'd be giving us the option to be a part of that. We are, in the middle of a sermon series just entitled Emotions. And so 2 weeks ago, we kind of kicked this whole thing off by just asking the question, how do you feel about how you feel? And we did something interesting. We opened the Bible and we looked in and we saw what it looked like when God came to earth in Jesus. And here's what we found. We found that emotions are actually good and from God. We found that they were intended to move us, and that our feelings, regardless of how you feel, point to a lot of what you value. They reveal what you value. And then last week we took a look at and said, hey, those things can break down for a whole host of reasons. But one of the reasons that's often overlooked, last week we said, is that they can be misaligned. And so if you're just catching up, if this is your first week here, I'd say it's worth going back in our app or on the website and catching up to where we are today. Because what we're doing today, and for the next few weeks following, is we're going to leave the general discussion about our feelings and our emotions, and we're actually going to drill down into emotions specifically and individually. And so this week we're kicking it off by talking about happiness. Happiness, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a lot about what our country is about. And yet, here's what I would say as a pastor, here's what I found just over the years, that we will destroy the first two at the opportunity to have the third. We will give up our life. We will also give up our liberty if we just get a small moment or opportunity of the possibility of happiness. Now here's what I know, and I'm not trying to single you out. Look, I realize that not everyone today is coming in happy, right? So that's not the goal. Also, my goal, just so you know, so I'm up front, as a pastor, my goal is not that you leave today, all of us leaving happy. What I'd like to do is just talk through a little bit about the hunger that we have for happiness as people and what God might have to say about that. We are hungry for happiness. You say, well, how do you know? Well, it's interesting. There is a Yale professor by the name of Laura Santos. She's best known for her work in the science of happiness. The science of happiness. And so she decided to put together a class to study and to teach some of the things that she's learned in her research. And in her understanding of the science of happiness, she was hoping, just by putting this class out there, she was hoping that 30 people, she figured she could get 30 people to sign up for this class, it would be a good first run. Let me show you the first class. Here it is. 1,200 people signed up for this class at Yale, the science of happiness. This class is the most attended in Yale's history, right? Not social sciences, not medicine, not philosophy, the science of happiness. After they taught this class, they put it online, and it was taken by 300,000 more individuals. It's incredible, right? It just blew their expectations. But what's interesting to me is not just how eager we are as people to study happiness, to look for happiness, to want happiness. What's interesting is that if you actually look at the research, we, of all people, are some of the most unhappy. So at a time when our desire is at its height, our unhappiness is also at its height. In fact, they did a study in the Harris Poll. It's done every year, and here's what they see. They've shown that the latest happiness index reveals American happiness at an all-time low. In fact, if you go on to read that, here's what you'll find. That 1 in 3 people report being happy. That means that on average, 2/3 of us this morning, if we were just asked, are you happy? Here's what we'd say: meh, no, nah, I don't know. And so some of you might be sitting there and going like, happy? What is this word that you're saying? I don't even know. What is this you speak of? Happiness, right? I'm an adult. Adults aren't happy. Like how does this happen? Well, in case you're asking that, I just thought, again, let's just define it, right? This is the Oxford English Dictionary on happiness. This is what we're talking about. It says feeling, showing, or causing pleasure or satisfaction. Synonyms being delight, enjoyment, fun. And maybe as you read that, you're going, yeah, all those synonyms are not, my name's not on that list. Like when I think about enjoyment, my life's not there. When I think about satisfaction, I can't get no satisfaction, okay? Like that's not me at all. And maybe that's you, and here's the thing, you're a follower of Jesus. And you're going, I don't understand. Because maybe I thought coming to Jesus would bring happiness. Or maybe you're somebody who goes, that's why I'm not following Jesus. Because I had fun friends, and then they found Jesus, and now they're no longer fun or my friends. Right? This is how it works. In fact, many of us might say, when we think about happiness and God, this is what we think of. Right? On one side, you've got happiness. On the other side, there's holiness. And they have nothing to do with each other. And maybe you're thinking, you got to pick a path, right? So you graduate college, I'm either going to be holy and do the Jesus thing, or I'm going to be happy. Because maybe in your life, you've not seen a lot of holy and happy people together. Or maybe you've seen holy people who you know what's really going on in their life, and they ain't so holy. And then they look happy on Sunday, and you know what's going on in their life, and they ain't so happy. And here's what I would actually say, that if you see people like that, here's actually what they've done. They've divided those two things, all right? Because when they're divided, and as long as they stay divided, here's what happens. I have to pretend at either or both. So when I see you on Sunday morning, how are you doing? I'm good, right? I'm happy. How was your week? Perfect. Didn't mess up at all. Don't go look. Don't check Facebook. Don't ask any of my friends, right? So like that's just kind of honestly a lot of what churches in the South can be. Right? But what if God wanted you to be happy? What if happiness and holiness actually could coexist and come together? You say, well, what would that look like? Well, it probably wouldn't look like pop psychology, right? So we're not talking about like, you come to Jesus, get a jet. None of that stuff, right? It also probably wouldn't mean poor theology, where you just got to think your way to happiness and you'll be fine. It probably would look a little bit more like reality and the human experience. And it's interesting because when we look in Scripture, here's what we find, that the guy who had the most opportunity and the most money and the most wealth actually has some pretty significant things to say about happiness. So if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. If you don't, it'll be on the screen. Some of you are in Ecclesiastes. It's kind of in the middle. It's in the Old Testament. As you turn there, really quick, if you grew up in church, you're laughing at me, because you're going, Ecclesiastes is the biggest downer in the world. That is a depressing book. In fact, one of our core communities was studying Ecclesiastes, and COVID happened. So there you go, right? You can thank them, right? In Ecclesiastes, the author is talking from the perspective of Solomon, King Solomon. He was a king at the height of Israel's greatness. Wealth, power, wisdom, had it all. Anything he wanted. And what he writes about, honestly, is how he pursued meaning, and how for a lot of time, all the way from chapter 1 through 4, he's gone, I haven't found a lot of meaning. I've had money, I've had wealth, I've had pleasure, I've pursued all those things, and I kind of feel like I've come up empty. And here, actually, in chapter 5, he pauses for a moment and begins to say something specific about happiness. So we're going to take a look at this, right? Here's what he says. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them. for this is their lot. Now notice automatically he uses the word satisfaction, right? One of the synonyms there. He's talking about happiness. Look at what he says in the next verse. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. So again, we see words like enjoy. We see words like happy. We see words like gladness of heart. So automatically, here's what he's saying in chapter 5. If you just dropped in like we did, you kind of get the idea that after talking about searching for meaning, he now begins to talk about this idea of happiness. And what's fascinating about this, and here's what we find, so I'm just going to tell you where we're headed, that when you look at this passage, happiness is what he's saying is happiness doesn't just happen like we tend to think. Like we tend to think, oh, if I just live long enough, work hard enough, do things enough, one day it'll just, I don't know, like it happens. Like I don't know if the sky parts and light falls down, if you hear music, I don't know. You'll just, one day, happiness happens. But here's what he's saying. Happiness doesn't just happen. Here's what he says. Happiness is a habit of your heart. It's a habit of the heart. It's a habit of your heart. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, I think there's some things in here. And so for the rest of the time, I just want to look and go like, what does it mean to have a habit of happiness in our heart? And what is he talking about in this text? Okay? Here's what he's saying. First thing I think we see here. When he talks about having a habit of happiness, we're talking about pursuing a perspective of gratitude. He's saying a heart that has a habit of happiness pursues a perspective of gratitude. Look at what he says in verse 18. This is what I observe to be good. Now listen, this is a guy who has spent 4 chapters talking about what he has observed to be empty and pointless and meaningless. So a bit like your teenager, when they start talking to you, you go, oh, wait, what? Okay. You listen. You're like, you want to talk to me? You want to be? Okay. So when he's saying, hey, I've found something good, we're like, what? What is it? And here's what he says. That it is appropriate for a person to eat, drink, and to, look at this, find satisfaction. Now the word find, if you don't know, he's talking about seek or see, like look for. And the word satisfaction here is actually the Hebrew word good. So here's what he's saying. It is good for us to look and take a survey of our life and find the good. He's talking about gratitude. By the way, he's not saying, hey, it's good not to work at all. Notice that. He says, in their toilsome labor. He's not saying, hey, happiness comes when I don't work or when I can't have my labor. He's saying happiness actually involves surveying our life and finding the good. Now, this may or may not come as a surprise to you, right? In fact, but I think it would be true that all of us would know someone who has a lot. They're set. And yet every time we talk to them, they're miserable. Maybe that's you, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend. Yet at the same time, you also might know someone in a different part of this country or in your life or maybe in another country when you've traveled and you've noticed that they don't have a lot. In fact, they may have nothing and you're going, yet how are they happy? They're so joyful and they're so like content. And what you're aiming at here is a little bit what he's trying to get us to think about. What you're seeing is that happiness, when you take a look around, is not tied to external circumstances. It actually tends to be more of like an internal thing that's happening here. You say, well, how does that function? Well, he tells us. Look at what he says. He says in the next verse, notice, moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and their ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and to be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. In the previous verse that we read, he actually said, God gives this. He's saying, at some point in time, we ought to be grateful for the gifts that God has given us. In other words, a perspective of gratitude looks at life through the lens as a gift, not gain. Now, I'm not going to let you I'm not going to ask you which one you think through. But think about our culture today. Think about our people. Just think about where we are. Is it gift? Hey, look at all the gifts that I got. Or is it what can I gain? What can I get? I think if we're to be honest, right, and I'm there too, it's this one. Yet gratitude, right, doesn't say that I'm entitled to my life. It doesn't say that all the things that I have are a burden. It actually says it's a gift. One of my favorite authors talks about a good, just fun exercise to do. He says, if you find yourself bored in a room one day, what you ought to do is imagine that you have been shipwrecked on an island. So just as a thought experiment, imagine that you've been shipwrecked on an island. And then he says, look around the room and pick out an ordinary object and pretend that it washed up on shore. And think about how you would feel. Right? So imagine that. Your ship goes down. I don't know why you're traveling by ship in 2020. Poor decision, right? It's 2020. The ship lives up to its name and the year, and it goes down, and you're on an island, and you build a little lean-to, and it's like week 2, and you get up, and you're walking along the beach like you do, and there in the distance you go, what? Am I seeing things? Is that an IKEA coffee table? Think about how you'd feel. You're like, an IKEA coffee table on a desert island, that's what I'm talking about. And you like walk up and you're like, oh my goodness, look at it. Is it the model? Yes, it's it. And you bring it, or I don't know what name it is, right? You bring it over and like you set it up in your little lean-to, and there you are on a desert island with your coffee table. And like what am I going to find? Now, the next day you're walking along. Is that a ballpoint pen and a notebook? Oh my goodness, right? So it would totally change your perspective, right? Right. Why? Because you're on a desert island trying to survive. Now, if that's how you feel about those normal, ordinary objects when they just randomly show up from a shipwreck, imagine how you feel when the God of the universe gives them to you. Right? Saying, hey, your family, your kids, they're a gift. Your finances, your breath, the things that are there in your life, they're given to us as gifts, not burdens. Now look, I understand. I'm not trying to be like, as a pastor, you might be sitting there going, oh, you live in Jesus land, and in Jesus land, I bet it's really easy to respond to things godly. And that's not true, number one. Look, I, as well as you, understand that you cannot always control your first response, right? So I'm not talking about the fact that your kid falls down, hits their head, has to go to the urgent care. Oh, let's see. Thank you, Lord, for this gift, right? That's not what I'm talking about, right? Our first responses are our first responses. But here's what I'm saying. You have a choice on where you dwell and where you set up shop and where you build your house. Here's what I know about you. And look, I'm just going to say, I think I know this about you because I know this about me. Here's what I find. Oftentimes, my feelings are fed by my thoughts. They're fed by my thoughts. And in the same way that I look in the mirror sometimes and I look at my body and go, how do I change this? And the answer is change my diet, change what I'm eating. Sometimes, not all, right? Sometimes when it comes to our feelings and we go, how do I change this? Maybe it's time we start to change our diet of what we're feeding our feelings when it comes to our thinking. To be clear, I'm not talking about think about $1 million and it shows up in your bank account. Not at all. That's unbiblical. In fact, the way that the Bible would talk about it would be put it this way. Paul writes about this. He was the first missionary of the early church. He says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. He's saying actually change the diet of our mind. Now, why does that matter? Well, here's why it matters. The Huffington Post did a survey recently of our conversation as Americans. And do you know what they found? They found that you and I, in our conversation throughout the day, 40% of it is complaining. 40% of our conversation is complaining. And look, man, that's easy to do, right? If it's hot outside, oh my gosh, it's so hot. If it's cold outside, oh my gosh, it's so cold, right? If I got a lot of sleep, man, I can't wake up. If I didn't get any sleep, man, I can't stay awake, right? If the kids were great, it's like, I just need a break. If the kids were bad, I still need a break, right? Like, it's just the job and the boss and the office, and you don't know what it's like. And man, let me tell you, and it can go on and on and on and on. That can be the diet of what we think of when it comes to gratitude. Let me just kind of give you some practical thoughts about this, right? So if you're saying, okay, that's me, how do I practically start to like change my thinking into gratitude? How do I find the good? Well, I think the first thing you might want to do is this: avoid starting your day immersed in your phone. Now look, if you want to be happy, maybe we shouldn't pick up the device that contains all of the information about everybody in the world and look at it when we wake up, right? Maybe we shouldn't just like go, hey, what did I miss? Now look, I'm not trying to say like that, because that's me too, right? I do it all the time, right? All that stuff isn't that great. In fact, one of the commentators, a guy who comments on this passage of scripture that we just read about thinking about good things, N.T. Wright, he writes this: the command to think about all the wonderful and lovely things listed here runs directly opposed or opposite to the habits of the mind instilled in us by the modern media. Read the newspapers. Their stock in trade is anything that is untrue, unholy, unjust, impure, ugly, of ill repute, vicious, and blameworthy. Is that the true representation of God's good and beautiful world? It's like, hey, what's ugly? What's bad news? What are we complaining about? Here you go. And if I wake up in the morning and I go, oh, it's such a great day, the birds are singing, and I throw on the internet, it's like, it's all there. In fact, here's what I would say, not just as a pastor, but as a follower of Jesus. If you want to change your thinking, maybe immerse yourself in the Bible, right? If the internet is the collection of mankind's thoughts, collectively, the Bible is the collection of God's thoughts. And so the way that I change my diet might actually begin picking up God's thoughts and not just going, hey, what does God want me to do or not do? But go, how does he think? How does he see my life? And how might that change the way that I see the things and the gifts that he's been given me? Last one, pretty practical. Start small, right? So if you're hearing this and you're going, you're right, life is worth living, don't go skydiving, right? Don't be like, that's it, tomorrow I'm going skydiving. Maybe step outside. Let's start with stepping outside your house before you step out the door of a plane, right? And go, maybe we look up at the sky, right? Maybe we look up and we go, the sun, the clouds, oxygen, great. It's a wonderful day. David Gibson writes this: if I'm not grateful for the little things, it's only a very short step to no longer be grateful for anything. And in case you think I'm making just a big deal of this, here's one last thing that God says in the New Testament. He says this: rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. Check this out: for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. You want to know what God's will for you is? To rejoice, to be grateful. Like, hey, what does God want me to do today? Rejoice, pray, and be grateful. Hey, what's God's will for my life? Who should I marry? What job should I get? How about we start with gratitude, right? Now notice he doesn't say, hey, give thankful for all circumstances. He says in all circumstances, right? Now, this is important, and the reason that it's important is because here's the tension. Sometimes I think we're unable to enjoy life because we're unwilling to be grateful. See how that works? In other words, if I think that the only meaning in my life is found by me creating it, I'm going to work real hard to create it. I'm going to exhaust myself. But if it's been given to me, if meaning is given to me as a gift by God, not created by me, I get to enjoy that. In other words, if significance isn't found in my work and my effort, in my grades, if significance is something given and not earned, I could stop trying to earn it and enjoy it. That's the way the Bible talks about it. What if your identity wasn't made up by you? What if it wasn't on your shoulders? What if it was actually a gift given by God to you to enjoy? How would that change your life? Pretty significant. So this habit of the heart has a lot to do with happiness. And in it, we want to pursue a perspective of gratitude. We also want to do this. We want to pursue a posture of contentment. Look at what he goes on to say. This is what I have observed to be good, that is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God has given them. And then he says this, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions, and the ability to enjoy them, look at it, he says it again, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil. What does he mean, lot? Like, what's he talking about? Well, I actually think what he's getting at here is this idea of contentment. There's a song that's written by a girl named Taylor Lindhart, not Taylor Swift. A lot of people thought I was going to say that. But this Taylor is also from Nashville. She wrote these lyrics, and the song, I'd encourage you to check it out because I think she puts her finger on a pothole of our culture's heart. This is what I think she says. She says this, last night I bought a lie. I saw an ad online. All these smiling people had it figured out. If I could be someone else, someone besides myself, I might have a little less to cry about. I'm on the other side of the glass, looking at the life they have. Ain't it so much better? It's always easier to believe. It's easy for them to be happy or whatever. And the song would go on to say a lot of other things, but isn't that our culture? Like, isn't that like our evenings browsing filtered Instagram photos of other happiness, going, man, I wish that was me. I wish I understood what it was like. And here he's saying, look, we're meant to be content. The author of Ecclesiastes in other parts of the book goes a long way to tell us that while we all have different lives, we're all part of the same gig. You say, well, what? Well, we all have like the same kind of trajectory and story. In other words, 1,000, 100,000, million different people, one plot. It's like a bad action movie. It's got to say, for example, if you're here today, I'm going to guess that you were born. Just going to go out on a limb, right? You were born. You had some sort of family, possibly. You went to some sort of education, some kind of food. At some point in time, you either or hope to graduate from something in some way. At some point, maybe you'll get some more schooling, or maybe you'll get some job. So maybe someone to settle down with. Maybe eventually you'll then have some kids, right? Where then you'll raise them in some sort of way, and during the summers you'll go to some place on vacation. Hopefully, someday you'll retire, and you'll get some sort of watch or something. And at some point in time, you will die. And that is the same story for everyone in some sort of fashion, right? You're like, that is very depressing for happiness. Why did you do that? Because even though their life is different, it's the same story. And the author's trying to say, what would it look like for you to consider the fact that your story, the one that God has given you right now, the one that he is writing right now, and the one that you are living in, might be the story that he has for your life. Rather than wanting someone else's story, which looks great but really is not all that different, what would it look like to be content? Here's the thing. We all think that if we could just improve our quality of life, our mind tells us, just improve your quality of life or your quantity of stuff. Right? If I could get a better quality of life or a better quantity of stuff, our mind is feeding us this, and we're going, then I would be happy. Yet do you know what research tells us? And by the way, the Bible would agree that we're wrong. In fact, this next guy, his name is Dr. I got to find it in my notes. Dr. Wedlinger. He's actually at Harvard. He studied happiness more than any other person in the United States. He has the longest running study of happiness that started in 1931 and is just now wrapping up. He has a TED Talk, you can go check it out, about happiness. And it's interesting, here's what he said. He said, as people, what we understand about life and the things that we think would be bad for us like smoking or chewing tobacco or eating unhealthily. Well, when we find in our study is that when we study people, the things that we think are bad for us turn out to be, wait for it, bad for us. We find out they're bad for us. This is this guy's job, by the way. So he find out they're bad for us. And he said, what's interesting, though, is that when we actually think, hey, life will be better if here's what he says, everything that we think will make us happier doesn't. He says the things that you think will make you happier, the quality of life, the quantity of stuff, no matter how much you put in there, it doesn't make us happier at all. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's for some people, but not me. And I know you're thinking that because that's what I do. We're all thinking, we're like, here's your happiness equation. You want to know what it is? It's mine too. It's this, some form or fashion of when, then. When I graduate, then I'll be happy. When I make 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 figures, then I'll be happy. When I find someone, then I'll be happy. When I leave that someone, then I'll be happy, right? When the kids are here, I'll be happy. When the kids leave the house, then I'll be happy. Right? When I get a job, when I have significance, when I have a following, when I have some influence, when I'm out of the house on my own, then we all do it. And both the Bible and research tell us it's not true. Yet it doesn't stop us. Look, man, it doesn't stop us from saying, not me. Right? All you got to do is think about the lottery. Every person who has studied people who win the lottery, and almost everyone who has won the lottery says, if you want to ruin your life, win the lottery. And do you know what we think? I would love to win the lottery. Every one of you, if I said, hey, today, you could win the lottery right now if you hit this red button, you'd be like, yes, that's what I'm doing, right? And here's why. You're going, not me. I got a plan. Not me. I'm different than anyone else. And yeah, it's not true. It's not true. In fact, there's a guy by the name of Clay Crockle. You can look into it. Clay Crockle is a therapist and a counselor for the uber rich. So he spends his time counseling people who are just extraordinarily wealthy. And here's what he says. He says this, if you have an enemy and you hate them and you want to ruin their life, buy them a lotto ticket. That's what he says. He's like, he's seen it all, he's heard it all, he sits across the table from it all, and he's going, it's not going to work and make anything better. At some point in time, right, we have to realize that it could be that discontentment is our greatest enemy of enjoyment. Comparison is killing your happiness. It's killing it. And we do it as a habit. And Solomon's going, hey, maybe we should change our habits. Maybe we ought to look at things differently. Because more is never enough. He says this in Ecclesiastes 5, the same chapter we're in, just a few verses earlier. He says this, those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? We would say, hey, what good are likes? What good are friends? The more friends you have, the more people you got to think about. The more influence you have, the more you got to think about how people would want you to act or who they want you to be. Like, we would just fill in the blank. What good is, we think if we have more, then we will be content. But that is not true. And here's why. Because listen, as long as your equation is when, then, it's always out there and never now. If it's always when, then, guess what that's not? It's not today. And when would you like to be happy? Today. And so if it's always out there and never now, how does that even work? Right? Here's the dangerous truth, and I think this is so important that we understand. Right? What if what keeps us from happiness is our endless search for it? What if we're so tired and so worn out and so unhappy because we're looking for it, and it's keeping us from it when it's right here in front of us today. The things that we've been given, and the lot where God knows where we are, and the life that we have. It's so important. That's why I think none of this makes sense without this last part. This habit of our heart of happiness. It's about a perspective of gratitude, as a posture of contentment. But here's what we have to do. And if you don't do this last, none of the first two really matter. At some point, we have to persistently connect the dots. Look, maybe you noticed this already in the scripture that we read, but look at what he says. This is what I observe to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life, check it, God has given them, for this is their lot. I'm going to go on. Moreover, when, check it out again, God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and to be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. If you've ever done a dot to dot, or you've gone to a restaurant with little kids and they put down the little worksheet that they give you to entertain the children, back before, again, this is my age, back before we had smartphones where you're like, look at this. They had these little pieces of paper where you would connect the dots. And at times, if you're an adult, you're looking at it, you're like, what is that? Like, there's a bunch of random dots on a piece of paper, and here's a big cluster, and there's some, and there's this one all the way out there. Here's what happens, I think. When I'm talking about gratitude, and when I'm talking about contentment, I think most of us, we tend to get that, but here's how we think sometimes. I don't understand how a cluster of things that I'm grateful for here, and maybe some random thing over there that I'm grateful for, and that table over there that I'm grateful for, how does that equal anything? And what the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to get us to do is understand that the things that we've been given and the place that we are in life to be content with, that when we begin to draw lines between those things, there's actually a bigger picture that emerges, and that's not just the gift. What actually emerges and rises to the top is a gift giver. And that all these things that we've been given, like today, and air, and children, and finances, are actually there so that we might enjoy not only something, but someone. They're meant to point us to something else. They were given to us by someone who is a good gift giver. And here he takes delight and pleasure when we find pleasure in the things that he's provided for us. Growing up, I got into a phase where I really liked G.I. Joes. Not the tall, like Barbie ones. The little plastic ones. They were my favorite, so they're the best. Sorry, right? And they came in containers like this for way too much money for plastic, but we bought them. And I had a friend who was also into them, and he wanted a specific G.I. Joe. And I'll never forget, he wanted it for his birthday, and so I was at an age where I wasn't old enough to buy my own presents yet, and so I orchestrated with my parents. We went, we looked, we found the right G.I. Joe. He couldn't find it anywhere, but we somehow found it, and we bought it, and we brought it home. And it was the 80s, and I said this in the first service, I would really like to know, I don't think they had gift bags with the tissue paper in the 80s. I just remember we wrapped everything, and oftentimes it was wrapped in like newspaper, like the comics. So like we wrap this gift, and we take it to the party, and the whole time I'm at the party, I'm like, he is going to flip when he sees this G.I. Joe. He's going to like just freak out. And so the whole time we're having cake, we're playing games, we're doing all this stuff, and I'm thinking, when do we get to open gifts? Because I want to see him open my gift. And I did that thing where it came time to open gifts. And, I'm like, here, open this one. It's from me, right? And you're like, oh, okay. So he opens it, and he's like, he is what you would think. He's ecstatic. He's like, you found this. I'm like, yeah, I got you the G.I. Joe that you wanted. He's like, this is great. This is awesome. It's wonderful. And he's like, let's go. And I'm like, yeah, let's go. And so like we go upstairs to his room with his brand new G.I. Joe toy. And I'll never forget, he opens the closet of his room and he flicks on the light. And there in his closet, he just has packs of G.I. Joes still in their containers. And he takes the gift I gave him and he puts it on the closet shelf. And then he goes, And he shuts the door. And I went, what are you doing? And he's like, I collect these. And I'm like 12. I'm like, what is collect? Like what? I'm like, you're not going to play with it? He's like, oh, no. And I'm going, I didn't say this to him, but in my head I'm going, I got it for you so that you would enjoy it and take it out of the package and play with it. I'm pretty sure the manufacturer who made this made it to be played with and enjoyed. In fact, I found it in the toy section of the store. What are you doing? Right? Look, I think when we fail to connect the dots back to God, here's what we're doing. I think at some point in time, we look at life and we're just not even taking it out of the box. Just put it on the shelf. God gave us life to be opened and enjoyed. And the best way that that is done is with Him. He wants you to go, hey, what did you intend my life for? Why'd you design it this way? Why did you give me the kids that I've been given? Why did you give me the spouse that I've been given? Why did you do this to me? For me? Like, how does this function? Now, maybe you're sitting there and you're going, look, I don't think God's like that. That's a different God than what I grew up with. I didn't know that God wanted me to enjoy anything. In fact, I thought God's job was to find life where I was enjoying it and stop it. Right? But that's not true. In fact, the gifts that we've been given, they're meant to point back to the giver of life. Here's what C.S. Lewis said in his famous book, The Screwtape Letters. It's written from the perspective of an older demon writing to a younger demon about their enemy, who, by the way, would be God. This is what he says about God. He's a hedonist at heart. All those fasts and vigils and stakes and crosses, only a facade. Out at sea, out in his sea, there is pleasure and more pleasure. He is a bourgeois mind. He has filled his world full of pleasures. There are things for humans to do all day long without him minding in the least. Don't miss the fact that a British dead guy just called God bougie, right? It's like he's a bougie God. Bourgeois. And you go, is this really what's going on in here? Absolutely. Paul would say this to a young church in the city of Ephesus. He says this, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our, don't miss it, enjoyment. So that they may, notice, so that, in other words, in order they might take hold of the what? Life that is truly life. Be like, where do I get that? Because here's the thing, you can have fun without God. I'm not saying you can't. But at some point in time, if there's no God, it's just inventory. You're not doing any gratitude to who you're thanking. You're just looking around and going, I got that, I got that, I got that. Inventory. But you know what happens? If it's God, suddenly it's worship when you enjoy things. And you can have a party, you can throw a great party without God. But if there's no hope, it's like the band is playing as the ship's going down. For people who follow Jesus, for people who know God, the things that we enjoy here on this earth, you know what it is? It's tastes and sounds and smells and feelings of a future home that we have yet to visit. We recognize it. It changes the way you see things, the way that you live things. Because here's the truth. The sad reality is, although we are meant to find our satisfaction in God, you and I find our satisfaction in 100 other things. We find our satisfactions in the gifts rather than the giver. But you know what God did? The same God who gave you life put on human flesh, and in Jesus came and gave his life so that he might give you new life. And not life that doesn't last, but a life that lasts, not in this world, but forever. To enjoy this world here and now, and there and then. And that's the good news of Jesus. In fact, here's what Jesus said before he went to die in your place and my place. Here's what he said. He said, "The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. But I've come," this is God in the flesh. Okay? God who made us, God who holds the universe together, looks at you and I and says, "I've come," which, by the way, has anyone else come for you? Anybody else showing up? "I've come that they may have life and have it to the full." And he emptied himself, humbled himself, died in your place so that he might fill your life with himself. And that you might have a relationship not only with the good gifts that he gives you, but the best gift giver in all of the world. All right, so some of you are here, and listen, we're about to pray. Some of you are here and you're finding pleasure outside of God. And that's fine for now. Or maybe it's getting kind of stale. What would it look like to maybe, right now as he's talking to you, say, hey, could happiness and holiness be the same? Some of you are here and you're going through some poverty, whether that's real poverty, like financial poverty, or maybe you'd hear and you say, I'm a poverty of emotions. I have a poverty of friends right now. I have a poverty of like just physical health. It's struggling for me to be happy. It's difficult. And look, I'm not, as I said, I'm not saying you're going to go home with I don't want you to fake it. But I'm going to pray that God would help you find satisfaction in him despite your circumstances. And if you're here and you're like, I've got a wealth of friends, I've got a wealth of emotions, I'm doing great. Those are a mirage. I'm going to pray that you find hope and satisfaction in God. Okay, and can I do that for you? Let's pray together. Father, we just thank you for this opportunity because of the life that you've put in our bodies this morning to get up, to breathe the air that you made, and to enjoy the goodness of one another and your word. You are so generous to us. Forgive us for not recognizing your generosity. Forgive us for plagiarizing this world. Lord, I pray that you would help us find contentment even in the circumstances that we are in, and that we might together collectively connect the dots back to you. It's all for you anyway. So change our hearts. God, we know that it's impossible this morning to have a habit of a heart if nothing has ever happened to our hearts in the first place. So may the good news of Jesus find a place in our heart and change our hearts. God, we love you. Thank you for loving us. Amen.